Gut check.
So at this point, I've done 3 videos for Sonic Origins, and frankly, I'm a little tired of talking about it. I'm not used to doing these kinds of ongoing discussions of games. I'm used to doing maybe one video for something and then moving on. And frankly, I'm not even supposed to be here right now. After my Sonic Adventure 2 video dragged through 4 entire holidays, I needed a holiday for myself. I figured I'd take a couple of weeks, maybe an entire month off, maybe even more than that, while I recharged and figure out what this channel was going to look like in the coming year. But I can't do that now because I dug myself into a hole with those other 3 Sonic Origins videos, and now I have to climb back out. This is Gut Check, the series where I get all weird and talk about my feelings for things that haven't happened yet. Because, you see, Sonic Origins was a game I started to get bitter about. I liked the sound of Sonic Origins. The pitch is incredible. Before Sonic Mania, the developers of that game made special, upgraded versions of Sonic 1, Sonic 2, and Sonic CD. It was sort of their warm-up for making Sonic Mania, right? They added widescreen visuals, enhanced sound, removed all traces of slowdown, and attached a modest pile of bonus features. Sega ignored these enhanced versions for years, a decade even, because most of them were stuck on mobile phones. And while I'm sure you kids out there are fine with that, I wanted these games to have big boy releases on big boy machines, like an Xbox or a personal computer. And Sonic Origins was their chance to finally get that spotlight. Plus, beyond the fact that parts of the Sonic Mania team were involved, the rest of the team involved with making Sonic Origins was like a who's who of exactly who I'd want to handle a project like that. I have a whole video about the names involved in Sonic Origins, but needless to say, it seemed like the perfect storm. Then Sonic Origins came out, and it wasn't that. Sonic Origins was a rushed, buggy mess that in some ways made a mockery of the games it was supposed to be spotlighting. There were insane, bizarre bugs that had never existed in any version of these games ever before. It was a disaster. Saved only by the collection's one and only patch, which fixed the worst of the problems but still left many more behind. If you'd like to hear me talk more about that one, well, I have a whole entire video review. I tried to end that video review on a more positive note, talking about how Sonic Origins just needed 1 or 2 more patches to truly shine, but in truth, it was hard not to descend into a totally negative rant about that collection. But I didn't want to seem like I was whining. After all, Sega had given me exactly what I'd been asking for, it's just the monkey's paw curled and gave me a cursed, broken version of what I wanted. Still, I tried to look on the bright side. But as time went on and no other patches manifested, it started to nag at me. Sonic Origins should have been the ultimate version of the classic Sonic legacy, and by botching that, Sega was pretty much guaranteeing I would never trust another classic game collection from them ever again. This was something practically served to them on a silver platter, an easy slam dunk, and they cut every single corner and did the absolute bare minimum work required to bundle 3 existing games together with one brand new remake. The more I thought about it, the more embarrassing it seemed. There was one final saving grace, the Steam database. For those of you who don't know what I mean by this, there is a website called steamdb.info, which pulls all kinds of interesting information out of Steam's API. If you don't know what an API is, it's basically a system where one website can view and transfer data with another website quickly and easily. If you own a game console, this is how you can post gameplay clips from your PlayStation to YouTube, because the PlayStation is interfacing with YouTube's API. So SteamDB, that is the Steam database, accesses Steam's API to get information and statistics about games on Steam that aren't always public knowledge. And when looking at the SteamDB page for Sonic Origins, an interesting piece of information was discovered. 4 brand new private depots: Nightly, Develop, Beta, and Review. In this context, a depot means a separate branch of the game's code, like a completely separate version of the game used for testing purposes. And the first two would update occasionally, maybe every few months, but beta and review updated weekly or sometimes even daily. This meant that somebody somewhere at Sega was still working on Sonic Origins, presumably on one final patch, though it was impossible to know why these private depots were being updated. Because, they're private. We can't see what's inside. So I waited, and waited, and waited, and waited, and waited. Months passed. I started to wonder, how big is this patch going to be, really? And, well, obviously we now have that answer, because at least as of writing this script, Sonic Origins Plus has just been rated in Korea. It's possible that during the production of this video, Sega might formally announce the game, and depending on how long it takes me to put this together, I might insert that extra information somewhere around here. But if I don't, then let's talk about what I think this is going to be. Obviously, the name Sonic Origins Plus calls back to the release of Sonic Mania Plus, meaning a version of what we already have, but now with additional bonus content. My first reaction to this honestly leaves a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. After all, Sega has yet to do right by the original version of Sonic Origins. By all accounts, it was overpriced and underdeveloped. It still needs more updates that it has never gotten. There is a very real fear that the original Sonic Origins will be treated like some kind of $40 early access version, with them possibly charging at least another $10 for the proper real version that we should have gotten from the beginning. Sonic Origins already felt overpriced at $40, and the idea that the full, complete package could cost more money is pretty insulting for 30-year-old Genesis games, regardless of whether they're remakes or not. The second thing I'm wondering is, what would they even put in a Plus version? It's been 8 months since the original release of Sonic Origins, and around 6 months since its first and so far only patch. That's not a lot of time to create new content for a Plus release, especially not when you're dealing with 4 entire games. Outside of fixing what should not have been broken to begin with, you can't really remake too many more games in such a short amount of time, not without, again, cutting unnecessary corners. There are really only 2 features that seem obvious to me. Some of the earliest Sonic Origins promo material apparently mentioned extra playable characters, and given how much Amy Rose is featured in the collection, it wouldn't surprise me to see that she's now part of the roster in some form. It probably wouldn't be a stretch for them to port over Mighty and Ray from Sonic Mania either. No joke, but I'd also like to play as Vector the Crocodile from Chaotix. E122Fi released a hack years ago that lets you play as Vector in Sonic 1, and it's one of my favorite ways to play that game now. His air dash makes that game so much more fun, and I'd genuinely love to see him become part of the roster. Also, I mean, come on, look at this guy. This is what peak performance looks like. Tall Vector for life. Data miners also found remnants of an unused, unfinished rewind feature too, so that could be added to the new Plus version as well. But beyond that? I guess they could properly add Knuckles to Sonic CD. He was missing from that game specifically, despite being playable in everything else. They could also extend Sonic 2's Knuckles and Tails mode to work in the other 3 games as well, because again, it's a little weird that it was originally exclusive to Sonic 2. Really, they could just make the entire collection more consistent overall, like fixing the drop dash in Sonic 1 and 2. Maybe they could adopt more feature parity with Sonic 1 Forever and Sonic 2 Absolute, the fan-made enhancements for the Retro Engine decompilations from a couple of years ago. Forever and Absolute add all kinds of extra settings and toggles for things like power-ups and new modes. For the brand new Sonic 3 remake included in Sonic Origins, Stealth and the team at Headcanon adapted a ton of popular features from things like Sonic 3 Air, so it only makes sense to extend that kind of care and attention to Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. So I'd love to be able to use the elemental shields in Sonic 1, for example. You can still technically do that in Sonic Origins, but it's considered a cheat code, and it's a little hard to get to. Sonic 1 Forever just makes it an option you can toggle right from the start, and that's the way it should be, especially in the Sonic Origins Anniversary mode. They could flesh out the game's museum modes with more videos, more concept art, and more information. Sonic's original designer, Naoto Oshima, has once again been making the rounds on social media, showing extremely early Sonic concept art, from a time before the game even featured Sonic at all, back when it was called something like Wonder Dream, or I guess in this case Twin Star according to this artwork, featuring two boys fighting against a monster known as Nightmare 13. I mean, the collection is literally called Sonic Origins, so it makes sense to have something like this about Sonic's origins, right? I'd also like a better menu system. Saving and loading your progress in the current version of Sonic Origins feels kinda like a mess. Instead of showing you a list of save files like it normally should, all you really get is a new game and a continue option. Continue makes it sound like that's how you should get the file select menu, but it just resumes you from the last character you were playing with no selection system at all. To get a proper file select menu, you have to pick New Game, and upon choosing your character, only then are you given the option to either start over from the beginning of that game or resume your progress. But even then, that's not great, because you can only have one file per character slot, and once you finish the game as that character, you can only restart from the beginning of the game. It's just very confusing, especially once you get to Sonic 3, which has its own internal file select menu with different functions and different rules. And these weren't problems with the old phone versions of these games either. They are new problems invented by how Sonic Origins handles its save system. Something I haven't really mentioned until now is also the way Sonic Origins looks. When it comes to Sega Genesis games on modern LCD screens, these old games always look dark and washed out because they were tuned for displaying on much brighter, more vibrant CRT screens. All Retro Engine versions of these four Sonic games use the original unmodified graphics as is, leading to a naturally darker image. An easy way to measure this is to look at the game's score, time, and rings display here on the left. The numbers are supposed to be white, but if you look at the color values, they're actually a shade of gray. On a proper retro television with the additional contrast and brightness provided by a CRT display, these numbers will feature their proper colors, as will the rest of the graphics. In Sonic Origins, everything remains looking a little washed out. It's especially bad for the restored Sonic CD FMV, which, at least to my eyes, feels extra dark. Just look at the whites in Sonic's eyes. The weird thing is, the thumbnails have proper brightness, so why don't the videos themselves? The only reason I bring this up is because Sonic 1 Forever actually includes a way to toggle between different color modes, including one that fixes the brightness and contrast issue. While I don't think Sonic Origins Plus needs all these different selectable color modes, I do think that some kind of filter would really bring the right amount of vibrancy back to this game. After all, if you're going to fix it, then fix it right. And none of this is touching on all the other issues either, like Sonic CD's soundtrack selection menu being buried inside the game itself. Actually, going back and talking about the menus for a bit, a lot of the menus in Sonic Origins are kinda bad. Like, this is super nitpicky, but the menu you get after failing a special stage in Anniversary Mode sucks. The way it abruptly pops up feels really bad to me because they obviously just bolted a new menu on top of the existing game. As a game developer myself, normally you'd give the special stage an extra beat or two before bringing up a menu like this. Here, they don't even wait until the score tally screen comes up. A lot of the mission mode menus are like this too. They just feel cheap and inelegant and like they were slapped together at the last second. The only other thing I could see them doing with Sonic Origins Plus is perhaps including some version of Sonic Mania. To me, it just makes sense, given that Sonic Mania runs on the same Retro Engine technology that all these classic Sonic remakes do. They could bundle all of the Retro Engine games together into one complete package. Now, of course, that could cannibalize the sales of Sonic Mania by itself, but you also have to figure that there is no current version of Sonic Mania available for the PlayStation 5 or the newer Xbox. They have backwards compatible versions from the previous generation, but nothing native or modern. That could offer some allure, especially if they could be charging a premium for this Sonic Origins Plus update. Sega clearly sees Mania as part of Origins too, given that the original release of Origins contained all the episodes of Sonic Mania Adventures. I'm sure they have a Venn diagram somewhere spelling out that everybody who is interested in Sonic Mania is also interested in Sonic Origins and wants to capitalize on bringing the two together somehow. At the bare minimum, they could add special Sonic Mania missions to the mission mode as a way to tantalize people into double-dipping on Sonic Mania after finishing Sonic Origins. Heck, maybe even have it read your Sonic Mania save file and claim it's some new version of the Sonic & Knuckles lock-on technology. Really tickle that nostalgia, you know? Also, I want to be able to separate widescreen and 4x3 display options from the idea of anniversary and classic modes. And by that I mean I'd love to play classic mode in widescreen because the coin system doesn't feel very well implemented. Playing classic mode in widescreen is apparently pretty easy to do with mods on the PC, but it should really be included with the official release itself. What I wouldn't expect from Sonic Origins Plus would be them restoring the original Sonic 3 soundtrack. If you followed my channel, you know I kinda harp on this a lot, and I also kind of dedicated a whole video about it, but I am 90% sure that the soundtrack is completely untouchable. Sega excommunicated Sonic 3 from the entire franchise for more than 10 years to avoid the legal problems surrounding that original soundtrack. Now that they have reasonable replacements from the Sonic 3 prototype, that's all we're ever gonna get, forever. It is the longest of long shots to expect them to restore the original Sonic 3 soundtrack. I'm not expecting any kind of encore mode either. Thinking back in context for Sonic Mania, encore mode was kind of bad. Mechanically it was interesting, but it wasn't polished enough and the levels weren't different enough. Based on what I've heard over the years, there were bigger plans for Sonic Mania's encore mode, but harsh time and budget limits really killed what they were able to do. In that context, an encore mode for 4 entire games seems like something that would be impossible to put together in the extremely short time span this has been in development. There's just not enough time to make it good. And even though I'm sort of repeating myself, I also wouldn't expect them to add any more games. Sonic Mania is one thing because, like I said, it's another Retro Engine game, but they can't just drag and drop a Sonic Spinball ROM in here and call it a day. They would have to disassemble and recreate the entire game in Retro Engine, and that's almost the same amount of effort as it would take to build a brand new game from scratch. The whole point of Sonic Origins was a collection of Retro Engine remakes, so putting emulated games into this thing would be weird and clumsy. So for those of you out there hoping for Knuckles Chaotix or Sonic 3D Blast or whatever else, well, that's not really possible given the time frame we're working with here. Plus, I think it's time that we as a society admit that, Sonic 3D Blast wasn't a very good game. I owned the Saturn version of that game when I was a kid, and it's a bit like watching paint dry. Sonic Spinball kinda sucks too. Levels get way too big and complex for the pinball concept to handle. And though Knuckles Chaotix has beautiful artwork and great music, it kinda plays like trash with maybe some of the worst level design in any Sonic game ever made. These games don't really need to come back without some changes to make them more fun. And again, there's just no time for that right now. I would say that I have high hopes for Sonic Origins Plus, but at this point it's leaving me feeling a little bitter. While I'm not opposed to the idea of a physical release of Sonic Origins, the idea that Sega could be asking extra money to get the properly fixed version of this collection is a little disgusting. Ideally, depending on how much this adds, it should be a free upgrade patch for everyone who bought it digitally, with Sonic Origins Plus being the thing they put on the box in stores. What I think this is really about is Sega trying to distance themselves from the bad launch of the original Sonic Origins. That launch version was so bad it was making headlines, and even on Steam, the game's overall user review score is listed as mixed. If you've ever spent any length of time looking at Steam user review scores, you know that if a game actually manages to earn a review score, it's almost always pretty positive. For Steam to list a game as having anything less than positive can be pretty suspicious, and that kind of stuff tells less savvy consumers to stay away from the product. Even if patches are issued to fix problems, it creates an uphill battle of fighting against that first impression. By effectively relaunching the game as Sonic Origins Plus, they can start over with a clean slate. But at the same time, though, I think a lot more people would have been a lot happier if they had gotten it right on the first try, and not needed to charge extra for a patch and a plastic box. Because, again, Sonic Origins was something they asked $40 for. $45, actually, if you bought it with all their dumb bonus content. If they're trying to push that up to $50 or maybe even higher, that feels downright exploitative, and there better be a legitimately good reason for doing that. These are 30-year-old games, and the enhanced versions are over a decade old in themselves. On top of this being yet another collection of classic Sonic games when most people already own at least one or sometimes two. The only difference was that Sonic Origins was supposed to be the ultimate collection of classic Sonic games, enhanced and modernized beyond what was previously possible. They were finally something better than yet another cheap emulator, and Sega botched that. Given how high the price already was for such a messy disaster, they cannot reasonably expect to hit us up for too much more money, right? Because if they do, then it would be the final insult to what an embarrassment Sonic Origins has turned into. And with that out of the way, now I'm taking a break. Video's over, folks. You can go now. Though, I'll once again remind everybody out there that if you don't support me on Patreon, you should really think about it. I put a lot of effort into my videos to keep them nice and compact, with a decent level of production value. And if you want more of those, the best way to do that is to help me live my life comfortably by becoming a Patreon supporter. If you don't like Patreon, I've also enabled YouTube's Super Thanks feature, which allows you to donate money directly through the video itself. I also have links in the video description for other methods if you'd like to show your support in other ways. Both Patreon donors and Twitch subscribers get early access to my Discord server, which may or may not be opening to the public eventually. I haven't decided yet. It's a great way to chat with me directly, and silver tier donors get access to a special Cool Kids Club channel where you can see and chat about unreleased upcoming content. Special shoutouts to Edboy, Gadget Feather, Ice Hedge, Jet Set Set, Jaragan, Keith Stack, Mark Bradshaw, Melko Driggs, Sam B, Setsune Wave, SoFox, This Dorky Guy, Aaron CT, Alt F4 Games, Fiesta, Jackson W, Jason H, L, Minka Cola, Rich Bitch, Taki Pup, The Partitioner, Big Knife, Bluish Yeti 68, Faison R, Logan A, Reversal Mushroom, Ryan L, Sabrina D, Teko Kami, Ashley J, and Rose S. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, just hit up patreon.com/BlazeHedgehog. There's a link in the description. And as far as I'm concerned, that's it. I'm done. I'm out of here. Goodbye, folks. See you next time. Whenever that is.